The atmosphere within the sterile, high-end corporate listening salon carries a quiet, heavily insulated coldness that systematically suffocates the natural, resonant receptivity of the human spirit. We sit in an enclosed observation suite, lined with dark, charcoal-colored acoustic foam padding that has been meticulously designed to absorb all stray vibrations, leaving behind a dead, pressurized silence that presses against our eardrums like the weight of deep water. The space is bisected by a massive pane of soundproof, double-glazed glass that overlooks a focus group chamber, creating an absolute physical and psychological division between us, the invisible observers, and the living human beings on the other side. The lighting in our suite is dim and diffused, casting soft, violet shadows that are meant to reduce eye strain, but instead serve to sharpen our internal analytical intellect, turning our minds into cold, predatory lasers operating in the dark. The only movement in the room is the faint, rhythmic scratching of an executive stylus on a digital tablet as we log data, track emotional metrics, and dissect human behavior into sterile percentages. In the background, the climate control system circulates a dry, heavily filtered air that smells faintly of commercial carpet cleaner and industrial adhesive, reinforcing the collective illusion that we are entirely detached from the raw, unpolished current of existence unfolding before our eyes. We look through the glass partition at the people speaking, and we recognize the shared, unspoken affliction that holds our internal anatomy in a state of invisible paralysis. We are the masters of superficial attention, the elite practitioners of a highly sophisticated form of relational cynicism known as silent auditory filtering. In this modern, hyper-optimized professional paradigm, we have been thoroughly trained to present a flawless outer veneer of active listening. We know exactly how to tilt our heads at the perfect empathetic angle. We know how to maintain steady, non-threatening eye contact. We know how to nod our heads in polite, rhythmic intervals that signal to the speaker that their message is being received. But beneath this highly orchestrated theatrical performance of presence, our internal intellect is frozen in a posture of profound, defensive hostility. We are not actually listening, we are evaluating. We are not receiving their words, we are pre-filtering, categorizing, and executing their vulnerability before it can even cross the threshold of our emotional awareness. We treat the speaker's raw, unscripted expressions not as an invitation for connection, but as a dangerous contamination that must be neutralized by our cold, analytical intellect. We are a collective of silent skeptics, using our polite stillness as an invisible, devastating weapon of self-protection. We have internalized a deceptive, survivalist belief system that commands us to treat every human dialogue as a potential breach of our emotional security. When a colleague risks their professional standing to voice a deep, intuitive concern about a project's ethical trajectory, or when a partner in our private lives stands before us with trembling hands, trying to articulate a profound sense of loneliness within the relationship, we do not allow their reality to echo within our flesh. Our minds immediately activate a hypervigilant defense network, processing their words through a cynical, internal filter that labels their vulnerability as sentimental noise, manipulative strategy, or emotional incompetence. We nod and we smile, but internally we have dropped a massive, impenetrable barrier over our listening throat, ensuring that our hearts remain entirely untouched by the human storm before us. We mistake this frozen, intellectual detachment for genuine objectivity and emotional strength, completely blind to the fact that our silent cynicism is the ultimate confession of our terror or absolute, systemic dread of being moved, being altered, or being humbled by the truth of another human being. Let us direct the sharp light of our internal interoception deep into the hidden, subterranean architecture of our mouth and skull, to witness the immense physical tax this silent cynicism extracts from our living tissue. As we sit behind the soundproof glass, maintaining our polite, hypocritical nod, we discover that the roof of our mouth has become a petrified fortress of compressed muscle. If we bring our awareness to the very back of our hard palate, where the flesh becomes soft and yields to the throat, we find a thin, ribbon-like muscle called the tensor veli palatini. This muscle originates from the scaphoid fossa of the pterygoid process at the base of the skull and the cartilaginous portion of the eustachian tube, traveling downward to insert into the broad palatine aponeurosis. In a state of natural, open receptivity, this muscle remains soft and elastic, allowing the soft palate to act as a sensitive, vibrating veil that facilitates the free, harmonious passage of sound, breath, and resonance. But the moment our mind adopts the posture of a cynical judge, our nervous system fires a continuous high-voltage stream of tension into this delicate structure, locking the tensor veli palatini in a state of manting, suffocating spasm. This deep palatal contraction exerts a violent, mechanical traction on the eustachian tubith narrow canal that connects the middle ear cavity to the back of our nasopharynx. The permanent clench of the tensor muscle pins the tube shut, altering the ventilation of our tympanic cavity and disrupting the delicate pressure balance of our internal ear. We begin to experience a subjective sensation of profound internal fullness, a heavy, dead air pressure that clogs our canals and causes our own voices and heartbeat to echo inside our skull with a distorted, booming intensity. This structural stiffness rapidly spreads to the neighboring levator veli palatini and the superior pharyngeal constrictor muscles, turning the entire back of our throat and the roof of our mouth into a rigid, unyielding block of flesh. We have literally closed the internal acoustic gates of our organism. We have created a localized state of tissue ischemia, cutting off the natural, fluid circulation of energy and awareness through our listening channels, converting our upper respiratory tract into an armored bunker designed to survive a sensory assault. To grasp the total, heartbreaking futility of this internal insulation, we must lift our awareness out of the corporate listening salon and transport to a deep, dark cavern carved into the side of a massive stone mountain. This subterranean cavern possesses a wide arched throat that opens out toward a vast primordial valley filled with ancient forests, wild rivers, and the vibrant currents of changing seasons. In the early morning hours, the valley comes alive with a magnificent, chaotic symphony of sound, the soft, melodic songs of returning birds, the gentle rustle of wind through pine needles, the thunderous roar of distant waterfalls, and the quiet, whispering breath of the morning mist rising from the soil. This symphony holds the absolute, unvarnished truth of the living earth, carrying the raw data of life's constant renewal and spontaneous creativity. But let us look at the mouth of this stone cavern. The ancient inhabitants of the mountain, terrified of the unpredictable forces of nature and desperate to maintain absolute control over their environment, have constructed a massive, heavy trapdoor made of solid, dead lead, reinforced with iron bars. This lead trapdoor has been dropped violently over the subterranean throat of the cave, sealing it shut with airtight precision. The people inside the cavern sit around a small, smoky fire in the center of the dark space, completely insulated from the valley outside. When the magnificent morning birdsong rises from the forest, the sound waves hit the outer surface of the lead trapdoor, but they cannot penetrate the heavy, dead mass. The lead does not vibrate, it does not resonate, it does not allow a single note of the valley's music to enter the depths of the stone cave. Instead, the only sounds that echo within the cavern walls are the stale, dry winds generated by the smoky fire, the repetitive, distorted coughing of the inhabitants, and the cold, cynical complaints of the elders reciting their old, historical dogmas about the dangers of the forest. The trapdoor provides an illusion of absolute safety, but it accomplishes this safety by turning the interior of the cave into a sterile, oxygen-pleated tomb, entirely divorced from the living pulse of reality. This lead trapdoor in the stone cavern is the exact somatic and psychological blueprint of our frozen tensor veli palatini. Our defensive intellect is the heavy, dead lead barrier, and the messy, unscripted expressions of human communication are the morning birdsongs of the valley. Instead of recognizing that true safety lies in our capacity to remain open, spacious, and resonant, allowing the world to pass through us like wind through a lattice windowway, attempt to achieve security by turning our soft palate into a solid iron sheet. We build a towering structure of cynical filters, preconceived judgments, and psychological labels to insulate our ego from the discomfort of being moved. When another human being speaks to us from their heart, their words hit our outer ears, but our locked palatal muscle ensures that the vibration is immediately strangled before it can reach our deeper somatic core. We do not experience their reality, we experience only the stale, dry echo of our own pre-existing opinions, spinning endlessly in the closed cavern of our dogmatic mind, repeating our cold evaluations to ourselves while the living, breathing truth of the relationship is executed at our gates. Let us confront the profound systemic exhaustion that this silent armor enforces upon our collective existence. When we live from a baseline of chronic auditory filtering, we become entirely encapsulated within a dry, sterile prison of our own design. We lose the capacity to experience the raw, unconditioned joy of genuine human resonance. We can no longer hear the subtle, unwritten frequencies of love, trust, and creative synchronicity that can only be registered by an open, relaxed, and vibrating organism. Every conversation becomes a tedious, mechanical transaction where we predetermine the outcome based on our cynical scripts, leaving us feeling deeply lonely, unseen, and unfulfilled even in the midst of our most successful professional collaborations. We are starving for the simple healing medicine of connection, yet we are the ones who keep our internal trapdoors bolted shut, ensuring that no fresh air or living music can ever penetrate our dark, analytical chambers. Meanwhile, our living flesh is paying a devastating price for this permanent psychological mobilization. The human soft palate and internal ear canals were designed by evolution to be exquisite, hypersensitive receivers of life's resonanza fluid, responsive gateway that allows us to attune our internal biology to the shifting rhythms of our environment. But when our mind adopts the posture of a detached, cynical judge, it overrides this biological intelligence, forcing our deep cranial structures into a state of permanent structural warfare. We do not feel the loss of oxygen in our pharyngeal tissues. We do not feel the chronic compression of our auditory tubes. We do not feel the steady, toxic accumulation of neural fatigue that turns our daily communication into an exhausting exercise in self-defense. We have turned our own mouth into an execution ground for vulnerability, sacrificing our vitality, our capacity for deep empathy, and our ultimate peace of mind on the altar of our defensive pride. We must allow ourselves to sit completely still behind our soundproof glass partitions, letting the heavy, unpolished reality of our self-inflicted isolation sink deep into our bones. We are not suffering because the people around us are manipulative, or because the corporate world is inherently hostile. We are suffering because we have become addicted to the dead protection of our own cynicism. The raw, imperfect communications of our colleagues and loved ones are merely the first arrows of a living, evolving universe, inviting us to soften our borders and expand our capacity for resonance. But it is we who shoot ourselves with the second arrows of defensive insulation, turning a simple moment of human encounter into an exhausting, life-depleting struggle for egoic survival. We are the ones who choose to live behind a lead trapdoor in a dark cave, ensuring that we will experience every authentic emotion as a dangerous assault, and that our own soft palate will become the very instrument that suffocates our capacity to hear, to transform, and to touch the limitless, unified ocean of reality, to witness the devastating toll of this deep palatal fortress in its most crystallized form. We must perform a precise psychological and anatomical autopsy on a character who embodies the absolute apex of modern auditory survivalism. Let us observe a senior focus group director and consumer behavior analyst, a woman whose entire professional career has been built upon her uncanny ability to sit behind two-way mirrors, dissect human desires, and predict market trends for global technology conglomerates. In her elite corporate circles, she is known as the master evaluator. For nearly 3 decades, her baseline operational mode has been one of total, detached intellectual skepticism. She does not enter a room to converse, she enters to audit. She treats every focus group transcript, every creative pitch, and every casual interaction with her junior researchers as a collection of hidden motives, manipulative strategies, and emotional scripts that must be exposed and dismantled by her cold, analytical intellect. Her internal narrative, forged in the fires of early corporate betrayals and hyper-competitive consulting firms, is absolute and non-negotiable. Never let down your guard. Never let another person's emotional noise shift your objective metrics. To be moved is to be manipulated, but let us look beneath the sharp, asymmetrical lines of her designer silk blouse and map the silent, agonizing biological rebellion occurring within her somatic frame. The absolute headquarters of her relational cynicism is located in that deep, ribbon-like muscular matrix at the roof of her mouth, the tensor veli palatini. This muscle originates from the scaphoid fossa at the base of the medial pterygoid plate, the spinous process of the sphenoid bone, and the lateral cartilaginous wall of the eustachian tube. From this cranial foundation, its fibers travel downward and forward, winding around the pterygoid hamulus like a cable around a pulley, before inserting horizontally into the broad palatine aponeurosis to form the structural framework of the soft palate. In a healthy, unarmored body, the tensor veli palatini acts as an elegant coordinator of internal pressure and acoustic space, sliding softly to open the eustachian tube during swallowing or yawning, allowing the ear to ventilate and the throat to resonate with the full, rich spectrum of human emotion. But in the master evaluator, this muscle has been transformed into an unyielding iron vice, because her nervous system is trapped in a chronic loop of defensive vigilance, interpreting every raw expression of human vulnerability as a hostile attempt to cloud her judgment or penetrate her emotional security. It sends a continuous, high-voltage stream of motor commands to the roof of her mouth. This permanent muscular contraction exerts a violent lateral traction on the cartilaginous wall of the eustachian tube, pinning the canal shut with airtight precision. This mechanical blockade eliminates the natural ventilation of the tympanic cavity, causing a profound imbalance of air pressure across her eardrums. She lives with a subjective sensation of permanent internal fullness, a heavy dead pressure that clogs her ears and forces her own voice, her breathing, and the mechanical click of her jaw to echo inside her skull with a distorted, booming intensity, a clinical phenomenon known as orthophony. She is literally drowning in the echo of her own internal machinery, completely isolated from the soft, ambient frequencies of the outside world. This deep palatal clench forces an equal and opposite reaction across the entire landscape of her throat and jaw. To maintain the posture of a detached, polite observer, while her tensor veli palatini is in a state of manting spasm, the neighboring levator, veli palatini, and the superior pharyngeal constrictor muscles must contract with maximum force. This hardens the entire soft palate and the back of her throat into a rigid, unyielding sheet of flesh, blocking the natural upward movement of the larynx and shortening her breath into a shallow, restricted pant at the very top of her windpipe. Her masseter muscles clamp shut to stabilize her jaw against this internal tension. creating a permanent microscopic clench that locks her temporomandibular joints. Her tongue, unable to rest flat and relaxed in the floor of her mouth, retraces backward and upward, its root bunching up against her soft palate like a defensive barricade, cutting off the fluid circulation of energy, oxygen, and awareness through her vocal and auditory channels. When she speaks, her voice does not carry the warm, somatic resonance of a relaxed chest and open throat. It is emitted as a flat, clinical, and hyper-intellectualized frequency, completely stripped of emotional texture. Let us follow this woman out of the high-altitude observation suites of her corporate empire and watch how this biological fortress saboteurs the sacred thresholds of her domestic life. She returns home late at night to a quiet minimalist penthouse apartment filled with cold marble surfaces and abstract sculptures. Her younger sister, a classical cellist who has recently survived a devastating, life-altering divorce that shattered her career and her emotional stability, is staying with her for the month. The sister has spent the afternoon sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to find her way back to her instrument. As the master evaluator enters the apartment, the sister sets her cello aside, her eyes wide with a mixture of raw exhaustion and a desperate need for simple human validation. She looks at her older sister and says softly, her voice trembling with genuine vulnerability, "Sister, I tried to play the back suites today, but every time I draw the bow, all I can hear is the sound of my life falling apart. I feel so completely empty, so terrified that I've lost my connection to the music forever. I just need you to sit with me for a moment and hear what I am going through. Don't tell me how to fix it, just listen to me." Watch the master evaluator's body the exact microsecond. These words cross the threshold of her ears. She does not soften. Her soft palate does not expand in sisterly compassion. Instead, her tensor veli palatini contracts with a sudden, vicious intensity, pinning her eustachian tubes even tighter and creating a sharp spike of pressure inside her middle ear. Her intellect, entirely hijacked by the chronic alert status of her nervous system, immediately translates this offering of raw grief into a subtle threat, a direct challenge to her emotional control and her professional boundary as an objective evaluator. She perceives her sister's raw despair as an unpredictable, chaotic storm that might contaminate her own carefully constructed stability or demand an emotional expenditure she is too terrified to provide. Her jaw clamps shut. The root of her tongue hardens against the roof of her mouth, and she fires back with cold, razor-sharp clinical evaluation disguised as advice. You are over-identifying with a standard biographical transition. This separation is simply a structural restructuring of your domestic life. If you want to regain your professional proficiency, you must stop indulging in this sentimental paralysis and schedule a session with a cognitive behavioral specialist to recalibrate your behavioral metrics. The sister recoils as if struck by a physical blow, the fragile bridge of emotional intimacy shattering into 1,000 pieces before it could even be crossed. She quietly bows her head, her eyes filling with tears of profound rejection, realizing that she is not standing in front of a sister, but in front of a frozen, soundproof glass partition. The master evaluator marches into her private study, her spine stiff as an iron rod, her palatal trapdoor locked tight, completely incapable of recognizing that she has just executed a devastating preemptive strike against her own flesh and blood. She sits alone at her mahogany desk for hours, her breathing confined to a shallow, dry pant in her throat, her vom hong behaving like a reinforced concrete bunker waiting for an attack, utterly blind to the fact that the only enemy in the room is the one she carries inside her own palatine aponeurosis. What is the deep, structural delusion that fuels this exhausting, lifelong campaign of silent auditory filtering? It is the absolute tyranny of the separate, impervious self. The master evaluator has built her entire existential security upon the false premise that there is a static, precious, and incredibly fragile entity called my objective mind that lives behind the bone of her four-hayden entity that must be insulated at all costs from the emotional contamination of the outside world. She operates under the total illusion that her analytical metrics, her professional detachment, and her clinical neutrality constitute her actual safety. She does not see that her defense mechanisms are not protecting her. They are protecting an illusion, a phantom identity built entirely out of corporate labels, social status, and defensive strategies. She is like a person who has spent millions of dollars building a massive, soundproof lead dome over their house to protect their ears from the sound of a distant thunderstorm, completely forgetting that the dome is also blocking out the sound of the rain that nourishes their garden, the voices of their children playing in the yard, and the wind that brings fresh oxygen into their living room. She confuses her temporary role as an evaluator with her absolute identity. Because she believes she is the solitary observer who must remain unshakable in a chaotic world, she cannot afford the luxury of a soft throat. She cannot afford to let her soft palate expand and vibrate in resonance with another human being, because to allow resonance is to allow vulnerability, and to allow vulnerability is to admit that she is not a detached machine, but a fragile, feeling human being whose heart can be broken by the sorrow of the world. She would rather endure the slow, systemic destruction of her internal ear structures, the chronic tinnitus that hums in her skull, and the total emotional starvation of her relationships than endure the minor, liberating indignity of looking into the mirror and admitting, "There is nothing here that needs to be defended. I am desperately lonely behind this soundproof glass, and I am ready to let the world touch me." This is the hidden self-destructive tax of our collective obsession with silent cynicism. We are all, in our own unique arenas, master evaluators of our own small worlds. We deploy this tensor veli palatini clench when we sit across from our partners at dinner, half listening to their day, while our internal intellect is busy formulating a cynical critique or judging their emotional expressions as inefficient. We deploy this deep palatal bracing when our employees or co-workers bring us a creative, unpolished idea, entering the meeting with our minds already closed, pre-filtering their words through our rigid operational playbooks, and dismissing their innovation as unrealistic noise before they can even finish their presentation. We do it in our social interactions, where we adopt a polite, detached smile while internally categorizing everyone we meet based on their economic utility, their political alignment, or their social status, turning the rich, magnificent landscape of human connection into a cold, transactional matrix. Let us contemplate the absolute soul-crushing fatigue that defines this mode of existence. Every single conversation becomes an exhausting exercise in containment, where a single moment of genuine emotional resonance means total vulnerability. We must continuously monitor our facial expressions, filter every incoming sound wave through a strict cynical matrix, suppress our natural human impulses for spontaneous laughter and deep tears, and maintain an artificial aura of unshakable, intellectual superiority before our peers and our loved ones. We have transformed our lives into an unremitting tour of duty in a psychological war zone that exists only within the compressed muscles of our own Vomhong. We are completely blind to the fact that the human voice we are blocking out is not an enemy to be neutralized, but a sacred instrument of universal life trying to wake us up, and that the lead trapdoor of our cynicism is the very structure that is choking off our access to the divine current of empathy that unites all living beings. To shatter this self-destructive fortress of silent cynicism and restore the vibrant acoustic grace of our internal listening channels, we must bring the radical, diagnostic precision of early Buddhist psychology directly into the compressed, petrified muscles at the roof of our mouth. 2,500 years ago, the historical Buddha walked through the bustling cities and quiet forests of ancient India, encountering an intellectual and spiritual landscape crowded with professional judges, detached dialecticians, and cynical evaluators who used polite silence and intellectual distance as a supreme shield against the raw, unpredictable currents of human suffering. These individuals sat in the public squares and royal courts with serene facial expressions, nodding their heads in apparent equanimity, while their internal minds were engaged in a continuous, cold execution of everyone around them, filtering reality through rigid conceptual categories. The Buddha did not praise their detached stillness, nor did he mistake their silent armor for genuine spiritual realization. Instead, he identified this state of frozen, judgmental isolation as a profound spiritual sickness, a toxic outflow of the mind known in the early discourses as asava, the deeply ingrained mental taints or fermentations that leak into our sensory perceptions and corrupt our capacity for direct, unclouded contact with reality. He observed that when the human mind is wounded by past betrayals or paralyzed by the fear of its own vulnerability, it constructs a highly sophisticated psychological filter designed to process life from a safe, untouchable distance. We turn our internal listening space into an ideological processing plant, pre-sorting every sound, every voice, and every emotional offering into rigid compartments labeled useful, inefficient, logical, or sentimental noise. The Buddha described this condition as a state of internal corruption, where our cognitive processing is permanently distorted by the four taints: the taint of sensory attachment, the taint of becoming, the taint of ignorance, and most importantly, the taint of dogmatic views. The moment an external voice enters our field of awareness, the law of the two arrows operates with absolute, neurobiological precision. The first arrow is the raw, unfiltered sound wave of another human being attempting to share their reality, the tremulous voice of a grieving sister, the unpolished, enthusiastic pitch of a junior colleague, or the chaotic, emotional cry of a child. This first arrow is completely neutral. It is a simple organic phenomenon composed of vibrating air molecules and vocal frequencies, carrying no inherent threat to our existence. But the moment this first arrow approaches the perimeter of our emotional security, our separate, terrified ego experiences a spasm of intense panic. It interprets the raw resonance of another person's emotion as a dangerous, chaotic force that might penetrate our defenses, expose our own hidden wounds, or demand an authentic emotional response that we are too frozen to give. Instantly, we pull out the second arrow of defensive cynicism and plunge it directly into the roof of our own mouth. This second arrow is the immediate, automatic layer of internal judgment, intellectual filtering, and silent evaluation that we project over the speaker's vulnerability. The internal commentary screams, "Do not let these words touch your heart. Do not allow yourself to be moved by this person's distress. Remain objective. Categorize their behavior, and maintain your intellectual superiority from a safe distance." The Buddha demonstrated that it is never the raw voice of the world that causes our profound sense of isolation and somatic decay. It is this second arrow of silent, cynical resistance that hardens our tensor veli palatini, closes our eustachian tubes, and turns our internal ears into a sterile, soundproof tomb. Let us explore the subterranean psychology of this defensive armor to understand why we consistently prefer the heavy, pressurized fullness of a closed vom hong to the simple, liberating grace of an open throat. The early Buddhist teachings point to a profound cognitive illusion known as sankropeka, distortion, the counterfeit equanimity of a frozen heart. We live in a modern culture that highly rewards emotional detachment, clinical neutrality, and corporate composure, treating the ability to remain unaffected by human suffering as a mark of professional excellence. We mistake this frozen, defensive insulation for genuine spiritual peace, But the Buddha exposed this state as a profound delusion born of intense fear. True equanimity, upekkha, is not a lead trapdoor dropped over the throat of a cave. It is not a state of cold, cynical withdrawal that protects itself by shutting out the world. True equanimity is an immense, boundless, and infinitely vibrant field of awareness that possesses the capacity to receive all the joy and all the sorrow of the universe without tightening a single muscle, without formulating a single judgment, and without needing to defend a separate self. It is a state of radical, unconditional presence that allows sound to pass through the organism like wind through an empty forest, leaving the internal mirrors of the soul perfectly clean, luminous, and unchanged. This brings us to the ultimate medicine that Buddhist psychology offers for the healing of our auditory channels: the cultivation of sunnata sotath, ear of emptiness. To practice the ear of emptiness is to completely abandon our historical role as a detached evaluator and transform our internal listening space into an resonant vessel. In the early texts, the Buddha frequently used the metaphor of an emptied water jar to describe a mind that has been purged of its dogmatic views and analytical filters. When a water jar is full of old, stagnant and muddy water, it has no capacity to receive the clean, fresh rain that falls from the sky. Any new water that enters is instantly contaminated by the stale residue at the bottom. But when the jar is completely emptied, when its old contents are thoroughly poured out onto the earth, it becomes a spacious, resonant chamber. When the rain falls, each drop strikes the empty interior with a beautiful, clear resonance, and the jar receives the pure water exactly as it is, without resistance, without distortion, and without limitation. When this realization drops out of our intellect and penetrates our visceral, somatic awareness, it completely shatters the mechanical framework of our silent cynicism. We realize that our frantic campaign to pre-filter and evaluate every human voice is a tragic form of self-destruction. We have been trying to achieve safety by turning our soft palate into a solid iron sheet and closing the acoustic gates of our organism. And all we have accomplished is the total starvation of our relationships, the accumulation of chronic pressure inside our skull, and the absolute isolation of our souls behind a two-way mirror. We have been sitting inside a dark, suffocating cave, listening only to the dry, stale echo of our own preconceived judgments, while the magnificent living symphony of the universe waits patiently at our gates. We do not need to protect a phantom ego. The human voice that stands before us is not a hostile enemy looking for a weakness. It is a sacred thread of universal life, an expression of the same primordial awareness that breathes through our own lungs. And we are allowed to soften our borders, open our eustachian tubes, and let their reality vibrate within our flesh without breaking our bones. This is the exact moment when the deep palatal blockade begins to dissolve under the warm, steady current of spiritual insight. Every time we practice the radical humility of listening to another human being without an intellectual agenda, every time we choose the vulnerability of being moved over the cold safety of being right, and every time we look into our internal mirrors and admit that our analytical metrics are merely temporary cages rather than the vast sky of truth, we are removing a heavy layer of stone from our somatic armor. We are training our nervous system to understand that our ultimate security lies not in our capacity to remain rigid, detached, and unshakable behind a soundproof glass partition, but in our capacity to become completely empty, completely receptive, and infinitely resonant. We are releasing the tensor veli palatini from its ancient, exhausting tour of duty, allowing our vom hong to expand into a soft, spacious vault, and opening the floodgates for the primordial, non-conceptual wisdom of the universe to pour through our entire auditory system, turning our body into a sacred instrument of boundless compassion that can hear the cries of the world and respond with an unconditioned healing grace. Let us allow this diagnostic light to illuminate the tightest, most compressed corners of our soft palate right now, as we sit in the silence of this contemplation. Let us feel the total, heartbreaking futility of holding up an invisible lead trapdoor against the voices of our loved ones and our colleagues. We are sitting in our minimalist, high-end environments, surrounded by our data tablets and our professional credentials, yet we are dying of emotional starvation because we have forgotten how to listen with an open throat and an unarmored heart. The gate to our liberation has never been bolted from the outside. We have simply been clenching our internal mouth muscles against it, terrified of what lies beyond our cynical filters. Outside our fortress lies the limitless expanse of a living, breathing reality, a world where we can finally let go of our second arrows, reopen our internal ear canals, and trust the untraceable, resonant intelligence of an emptied mind to guide our communication across the beautiful, unmapped landscape of our shared human destiny. The dissolution of this deep, palatal blockade requires us to entirely abandon the abstract battlefields of our intellectual evaluation and descend directly into the compressed, petrified muscle fibers at the roof of our mouth. We cannot dismantle a lifetime of silent cynicism and automatic auditory filtering by formulating another brilliant critique or writing a sophisticated psychological treatise. The analytical intellect that manufactures the detached, judging filter is the exact same energy that keeps the tensor veli palatini locked in an iron vise. Therefore, we must deploy a systematic, somatopsychic de-armoring protocol right in the middle of our high-pressure modern environments, transforming our boardroom seat, our consulting salon, and our private penthouse study into laboratory of radical neurobiological softening. We must learn to melt the dense, fibrous bands of the soft palate and reintroduce fluid, lubricating air pressure into the compressed eustachian tubes using the warm, steady, and non-judgmental current of visceral interoception, shifting our baseline existence from a rigid, soundproof lead trapdoor into a clean, luminous mirror that allows the world's resonance to vibrate through our flesh without a single barrier. Let us begin with the foundational somatic intervention designed to unlock the primary physical anchor of our relational cynicism, the intraoral space expansion and tympanic pressure equalization protocol. To practice this, we do not need to abandon our professional duties, retreat to a secluded monastic sanctuary, or alter our daily calendars. We can perform this sitting right in our high-backed executive chair behind the glass mirror, or while sitting across from a loved one during a difficult conversation, during a brief, critical pause before we formulate our verbal response. We sit with our pelvis settling heavily into the seat, allowing our weight to drop completely out of our chest and shoulders, and we bring our internal attention to the very back of our hard palate, right where the roof of the mouth becomes soft and yields to the dark vault of the throat. This is the anatomical gateway of our auditory control. To activate our interoceptive awareness, we gently press the tip of our tongue against the center of our hard palate. Then slowly slide it backward until it touches the soft, fleshy veil of the soft palate, marking the location of the tensor veli palatini fibers. We do not apply hard, piercing pressure. We simply offer this deep cranial junction the warm, spacious quality of a compassionate, non-judgmental awareness. With our lips gently closed but our teeth slightly parted to release any compensatory clenching in our masseter muscles, we initiate an internal, almost invisible movement of the Vom Hong. We begin to invite the physical sensation of the very beginning of a silent internal yawn. This is not a full, overt yawn that disrupts the room. It is a microscopic, internal expansion that takes place entirely within the deep tissues of the throat. As we invite this beginning of a yawn, we feel the root of our tongue drop downward and forward toward the floor of the mouth, while the soft palate rises and expands upward and backward, like a silk canopy catching a gentle breeze. We pair this internal expansion with an elongated, completely passive exhalation through the nose, a long, slow, evaporating breath that mimics the sound of warm air escaping a deep underground vault. We are sending a direct, non-linguistic neurological message to the motor neurons of our palatal armor, whispered directly into the cranial nerves, announcing that the emotional war is over, that there is no separate identity left to defend, and that the acoustic gates of the organism are finally permitted to open. We track the sensations that surface with absolute precision, welcoming the sudden pops, the crackles of pressure equalization inside our ears, and the historic numbness of our skepticism, letting the steady gaze of our awareness dissolve the calcified adhesions until our eustachian tubes open, and the air pressure inside our skull balances perfectly with the atmosphere of the room. Once the deep palatal junction begins to reclaim its natural, floating elasticity, we immediately extend this internal thaw to the throat and vocal channels through the practice of pharyngeal widening and neutral line relaxation. We drop both arms completely passive beside our torso, letting our hands rest loosely on our lap, palm upward in a posture of radical non-resistance. Our old, defensive reflex is to clamp our jaw shut, pull the root of our tongue backward, and tighten our pharyngeal constrictors, bracing the back of the mouth like an iron shield to insulate our ego from the impact of the speaker's emotional state. To shatter this matrix of tension, we bring our breath into the upper neutral, lined rough ridge of bone at the back of the skull, where the deep neck muscles insert, and imagine the breath traveling up through the open throat, expanding the back of the mouth from the inside out, creating an elegant, spacious length in the entire upper respiratory column. As we exhale, we do not collapse our posture. We simply allow the shoulders to slide softly downward and outward toward our waist, feeling the root of the tongue soften and spread flat like liquid wax over the lower jaw. We recognize that the vom hong and the internal ears are not a fortress wall to be hardened against the world, but a highly sensitive, vibrating drum that can receive the frequency of any human voice without tension. We let the mineralized stress drain out of the pterygoid processes, letting it drop down through the cervical spine, through the thoracic basket, and sink directly into the earth below. This simple act of unlocking the soft palate while listening to a critical focus group report, or while facing an intense personal disagreement with a partner, shifts entire autonomic nervous system away from the hypervigilant stance of sympathetic fight-or-flight and anchors us in the spacious, shock-absorbing presence of an unarmored mind that has nothing to defend, nothing to evaluate, and everything to receive. From this grounded, anatomical configuration, we elevate our training into the psychological domain through the cultivation of radical auditory transparency. When we operate from the illusion of the separate, impervious self, we treat every raw expression of human vulnerability as a hostile attempt to cloud our metrics or manipulate our emotional state. The practice of radical auditory transparency requires us to completely invert our understanding of listening strength. We look at the incoming arrow of another person's voice, and instead of tightening our soft palate to repel it with a cynical filter, we consciously expand our internal mental space, making ourselves as porous, spacious, and non-resistant as a lattice window. We practice the silent mental utterance, "I am empty enough to let your reality echo within my flesh without losing my center." We deliberately allow the words of our interlocutor to enter our field of awareness without passing through the distorting, defensive filters of our clinical intellect. When a family member or a junior researcher points out a deep flaw in our strategy or reveals an uncomfortable truth about our character, our primitive conditioning will scream at us to launch a devastating, rational counteroffensive or drop into a cold, judgmental silence. The practice requires us to catch this somatic contraction at the very root of its arising. We feel the immediate heat at the roof of our mouth, the sudden lateral traction on our eustachian tubes, the tightening of our jaw, and instead of speaking or retreating into a cynical script, we pause. We execute the intraoral space expansion. We let our soft palate rise. We allow our ears to equalize, and we open our mind to receive the full, raw resonance of the moment. We look into the eyes of the speaker, not with the predatory gaze of an auditor looking for an emotional weakness, but with the clean, undefended eyes of a beginner who is willing to be moved by the truth. We ask ourselves, not how can I dismantle this argument, but rather, what dimension of life am I refusing to experience through my current filters? We move from the rigid immobility of the lead trapdoor to the infinite, untraceable space of the empty mirror, recognizing that our true power lies not in our ability to remain detached and unaffected, but in our capacity to remain completely empty, completely receptive, and infinitely resonant in the midst of a changing universe. To weave this transformation into the dense fabric of our professional and personal routines, we must implement a daily rhythm of continuous de-armoring micro-steps. We use the constant mundane transitions of our modern schedule, the act of putting on our headphones, stepping behind a two-way observation mirror, answering a phone call, or sitting down across from our partner at the kitchen table as precise mindfulness anchors. Every time we cross one of these thresholds, we refuse to let our minds race ahead into the next analytical calculation or cynical evaluation. We halt at the gate. We take exactly 60 seconds to inhabit the internal landscape of our Vom Hong. We drop our awareness into our tensor veli palatini muscles, measuring the density of the tissue at the roof of our mouth. We execute 2 slow nasal exhalations. We invite the internal beginning of a yawn. We let our ears open, and we consciously allow the calcified stress of the previous hour's intellectual friction to wash out of our pharyngeal fibers before we utter a single word to the next human being. We treat each transition not as an annoying delay in our corporate schedule, but as a sacred opportunity to return our listening channels to neutral, ensuring that we do not bring yesterday's heavy lead trapdoors into today's sanctuaries. Let us contemplate how this practice radically reorganizes the way we communicate and exist within our relationships. When we move through the world with a locked tensor veli palatini, our speech is a cold, weaponized instrument, characterized by a flat, clinical cadence, pedantic explanations, and a total absence of somatic warmth. We speak to control the space and keep the vulnerability of life at a safe distance. But when we speak from an expanded soft palate and a ventilated internal ear, our voice undergoes a profound tonal transformation. It drops into a deeper resonant chamber, carried by the slow, natural movement of an open throat and an uninhibited diaphragm. Our speech becomes an instrument of authentic inquiry and healing resonance, rather than self-protection. We are no longer using our words to build barriers, we are using our presence to build bridges. We can listen to a completely divergent worldview, a raw expression of grief, or a deep personal critique with a soft palate, allowing the energy of the speaker's words to vibrate through our body without triggering an internal war, responding from a place of clear, non-dual empathy rather than survivalist panic. This is the development of genuine, unshakable spiritual momentum power that does not rely on thickening our cynical filters or maintaining an artificial appearance of absolute, unshakable composure. A lead trapdoor bolted over the throat of a cave is immensely rigid, yet its very mass ensures its total isolation because its strength is mechanical and closed. But the open sky can never be shattered by an explosion, pierced by a spear, or confined by an analytical metric. You can fire 10,000 emotional voices into the open sky, and the sky does not scream, it does not lock its palate in terror, and it does not launch an internal campaign of cynical self-justification. It simply remains what it is, an infinite, luminous expanse of clear space that allows the sound waves to fly through its emptiness until they exhaust their kinetic velocity and dissolve harmlessly into the silence. By dropping our separate evaluator targets, by releasing the chronic clench around our tensor veli palatini muscles, and by welcoming the practice of radical auditory transparency, we are stepping down from the fragile isolation of the silent skeptic and returning to our true nature as the empty vessel. We are reclaiming our birthright as elastic, responsive organisms that can meet any strategic crisis, any focus group insight, and any relational friction with an uninhibited, fluid, and undefended grace. Let us feel the immediate, tangible reality of this practice taking root within our roof of the mouth right now, as we rest in the quiet sanctuary of this contemplation. The heavy, pressurized tension at the back of our palate is beginning to give way to a warm, vibrant circulation of blood, oxygen, and life. The thick, petrified bands of our deep mouth muscles are loosening their desperate lateral pull, allowing our eustachian tubes to open and breathe like tiny internal lungs. The compressed tympanic cavity is expanding, releasing its ancient hold on our personal history and our professional pride, allowing our mind to become soft, silent, and completely spacious. We are no longer the terrified defenders of an untouchable mental kingdom. We are the open, luminous witnesses to the beautiful, ever-changing symphony of universal intelligence. We have dismantled our lead trapdoors, we have dissolved our iron bars, and we have allowed our analytical armor to melt completely into the open air of our true nature. We are here, our throats are open, our ears are clear, and we are finally, radically, and beautifully ready to hear the world without leaving a single trace of cynicism behind. The total dissolution of our deep palatal armor brings us at last to the threshold of a new state of existence, the unfazed acoustic field. When the tensor veli palatini finally surrenders its ancient, exhausting role as an internal security guard, a profound structural and spiritual silence floods the entire architecture of our skull. The back of our mouth is no longer a petrified fortress of compressed tissue. It has returned to its primordial designer, soft, floating veil of pure awareness that rises and falls in perfect, frictionless harmony with the changing currents of the world. Our internal ear canals are fully ventilated. Our eustachian tubes breathe with fluid ease, and the heavy, suffocating pressure that once trapped us within the echo of our own intellectual machinery has evaporated into thin air. We are no longer sitting behind a soundproof glass partition in a corporate listening salon, nor are we hunkered down inside a dark stone cave behind a heavy lead trapdoor. We have stepped out into the open valley of reality, where our mind is completely empty and our body has become a highly sensitive, vibrating instrument of boundless resonance. In this state of unconditioned transparency, we begin to embody the true spiritual heart of Avalokiteshvarathi, archetype of ultimate compassion, who hears the cries of the world not by filtering them through a cynical, analytical intellect, but by becoming an infinite, unified ocean of presence. When someone stands before us to speak, their words do not hit a wall of judgment, nor do they trigger an immediate tactical counteroffensive at the roof of our mouth. The sound waves pass through our open throat, through our relaxed jaw, and through our soft palate, like light passing through clean glass. If they speak from a place of deep anger, we do not tighten our tissues to repel them. We allow the frequency of their anger to vibrate through our empty vessel until it reveals its underlying root of pain. If they speak from a place of raw, unpolished grief, we do not dismiss their vulnerability as sentimental noise. We hold their sorrow within the limitless expanse of our soft, expanded throat, allowing their reality to be fully seen, fully heard, and fully held without a single barrier. We recognize that true listening is not a passive submission or a clever professional transaction. It is a radical act of spiritual generosity that dissolves the illusion of the separate self and reveals the profound, indivisible unity of all living things. As we step back into our modern lives, moving through the high-pressure corridors of our corporate empires, our busy family kitchens, and our intense professional collaborations, we carry this empty resonance as our ultimate baseline of power. We no longer need to pretend to be unshakable, detached, or intellectually superior to maintain our emotional security. Our safety does not lie in the thickness of our cynical armor, but in our total willingness to be moved, to be altered, and to be humbled by the truth of each unfolding moment. We can sit in the most chaotic focus group observation suite, the most polarized corporate boardroom, or the most painful domestic dispute, with a completely open vom hong and a perfectly clear inner ear, holding the entire room within the shock-absorbing field of our undefended presence. We have discovered the supreme, paradoxical secret of the spiritual warrior, that the softest tissue in the human body, when completely relaxed and empty of dogmatic views, is infinitely stronger than the hardest iron shield of a terrified ego. Let us allow this profound transformation to settle deep into the marrow of our bones as we prepare to re-enter the magnificent, unscripted symphony of our daily existence. The lead trapdoors have been permanently melted into clean air, the iron bars have dissolved, and the stone cavern of our isolation has opened its throat to the infinite sky. We are standing at the edge of the valley, our auditory channels are wide open, our flesh is vibrant and alive, and the fresh, unconditioned air of reality is flowing freely through our entire organism. Every voice that approaches us is a sacred invitation to practice the ear of emptiness, and every human encounter is an opportunity to turn our body into a temple of boundless compassion. As you prepare to close this contemplation and step back into the world, sitting across from the very next person who wishes to share their heart, their fears, or their unpolished truth with you, can you feel the subtle, liberating expansion that occurs at the roof of your mouth when you consciously choose to drop your second arrows, dissolve your cynical filters, and allow their living reality to vibrate through the empty, boundless space of your undefended soul?